Hello, and happy Christmas, you filthy animals. Many of you are probably traveling for the holidays or have been traveling since this is coming out a little after Christmas. And for those of you with little fluff balls, you likely had to source some kind of way to keep them safe while you're gone. And I'm imagining that many of you might have used a service like Rover here, which is used to source pet sitters and places for your pets to stay while you go on vacation. And we're going to take a stab at redesigning this entire landing page today, top to bottom, including the footer, because ultimately I feel like there's a lot of potential to improve this flow, right? This big form here looks intimidating to me as a user, and I think that we can kind of tackle it in a manner such that maybe we break it into multiple steps, or we just kind of refactor the information hierarchy so that I'm not completely overwhelmed with lots of information at once. Specifically, with a landing page like this, I want to do a few things, or I imagine that users want to do a few things. First of all, they want to get a pet sitter for their cat or their dog. Now, given that we're looking at the UI here, we can tell that it's a little more than pet sitting. Obviously, it's also dog walking, doggy daycare, drop-in visits, things like that. So there's got to be some kind of multi-select there. But people have many different pets of different types. They need to specify the dates, the interval for which they need service, and then a little more contextual information. But you might also want to view an interesting offer that's relevant to you. I'm going to try and implement this call to action here as well. I'm going to persist that throughout the UX here. And then understand a little more about the service so I can make an informed decision, right? Like, some people might not know what Rover is. They may have just landed on the landing page after clicking on an ad. So a little bit of education is going to be necessary here. But also, I would say more importantly, users are going to want to review other pet owners' experiences from Rover so they can kind of get a feel for whether or not their pet will be in good hands. And ultimately, they want to understand end-to-end how the process works. So it looks like Rover's done a pretty damn good job of doing the latter user stories there. Now, the bulk of the UX, value is going to be in redesigning this form. So just going to get stuck in and see what we come up with. So hang in there, folks. This will be a fun one. You know the drill by now. We've designed about 25 different navigations on this channel so far, so I'm going to skip you through the boring part and get you to the meat of the action here. As always, the most important part of any kind of marketing landing page is the big bold text in the first H1 element on the site. So here we're just taking the H1 that they had previously on their site because it was really quite specific and used a lot of nice natural language. So find loving pet care in your neighborhood helps to really encompass what Rover does in a very neat way. And one of the problems that I found in the existing UI was that it was really overwhelming. There was a lot of different things that you could enter into that form. And I think partially the reason for that was that they were trying to do, 5 different forms in one for all the different services they offer. So why not present the user with the first set of options to disambiguate what they need? Do they need pet sitting or dog walking? And then give them a tailored form for either one that they click on. Here I spent quite a bit of time coming up with the imagery for the homepage hero, and it's kind of shocking how long it took me to come to the correct conclusion here, because the homepage imagery really needs to just visually explain what the product or service does. And these paws, although they look kind of cool, don't do that at all. So eventually you'll see me come to the conclusion that you really should be showcasing here what it's like to have a digital relationship with someone who's taking care of your pets while you're gone. And you'll see that kind of come together in the next couple minutes. On my first pass at coming up with some mechanism for a user to schedule pet boarding, I wanted to give them a modal experience because incurring another page load is an opportunity for them to leave the page if there's a server error or if it just takes too long. Eventually I changed my mind on this, but I do think that doing the scheduling in a contained separate experience is the way to go for an improved usability on this particular flow. Again, with the caveat that a lot of this changes later, I just want to underscore that I could have made the pet selection input control a drop-down. But generally you want to avoid drop-downs because they incur extra input from the user and they're really difficult to make work on mobile. So here I'm just listing out all the possible options that users could have and then giving them an other selection where they can type in something special if they have an atypical pet that they want to try to board. This design pattern you'll see throughout the rest of the UI, and I would generally consider that that is best practice when you need to select from one of many options. You might be able to tell from my facial expressions here, but I'm getting really frustrated, and sometimes you can kind of get yourself stuck in a rabbit hole with design where you're just trying to make something work that ultimately is just fundamentally not going to work. And I do end up taking a break here and coming back a few days later, so I'll just let past Mark explain. So you've probably been able to tell from my facial expressions and egregious lack of progress on this design that I just feel like something's weird, something's wrong about this UI. So I'm going to take a break and come back to this a little later today with a fresh brain, a fresh context, and see if I can't just bang this out much more quickly. All right, we're back. It's a new day. I've got a complete context reset. I've got a couple of notes. I've been thinking about this in my dreams for the past couple of days. And we're going to take another stab at this to see if we can make any progress. So let's get stuck in. Alright, so off the bat, I was clearly trying to squeeze way too much into a modal, and I think that for a really involved multi-step signup flow like this, it's just more appropriate to have it be its own contained space. So I'm using the pattern where you have the steps on the left and the actual form on the right, and we've stripped the navigation completely, and that's a kind of sneaky little conversion tactic to encourage people to stay on the form that they're at. However, we have also given the user a way to close out of this modal or perceived modal, this full screen experience in the upper right, if they ultimately want to do that, because otherwise it feels a little unethical. Another mistake I was making in my previous attempt was just porting over all of the fields as they existed on the current site, and with that came a lot of bad design decisions, I think. So what I'm doing here is, instead of letting them tell me how many pets and what type of pet they want to bring first, I'm just letting them give me an inventory of all the pets that they want to board, and then from there we'll take all that data, sum it up to get a total number of pets that we need for the given boarding event. So here we've got the form, with all of the pets that we're listing out, all the relevant details, the weight, the name, and we'll just build one of these every time someone wants to schedule a new boarding event, and then send that to the server where we'll do all the necessary techno wizardry that we would do previously in a separate form. It's very important that when you have a primary call to action on a page, such as next step here in green, if you want to put buttons elsewhere on the site, you don't want them to also be saturated with any given color. So here I'm just using a simple inline button without any background color to allow the user to add more pets, because we want to send the signal, hey, if you want to add more pets, you can do that here, but we really want you to move to the next step when you're ready. So that's made obvious for you. Here you can see me undoing the mistake that I made in the previous iteration of this form, where I had the forbidden drop-down for both animal type and weight. Generally, animals fall into certain buckets of weight categories, so instead of letting the user, or forcing the user rather, to type a number, we just give them a general range, because that's really the meaningful information. I need to know if this dog coming is huge, or if it's relatively small. You know, it's still kind of useful information. So again, we're switching back to a group of button options as opposed to a dedicated drop-down for multi-select interfaces. I'm a big believer in trying to do what you can to preserve the user's privacy, but for something like this, where you can easily answer several form elements by just asking for their location, a polite little indicator that says, hey, click to use your location is a pretty non-egregious offense. And then presumably once you went through this form, you'd be presented with a list of options from which you could select a boarding facility to take your animals. But for the sake of simplicity here, given that this video is already 14 minutes long, I kind of realized I'm doing too much. Let's just stop here and go back to the main landing page and embellish the other content there. So me in my non-fried brain have finally realized that the current hero image doesn't really do a good job at explaining the experience of participating in Rover. So here I'm changing the existing visual depiction to be a representative of kind of a text message SMS conversation between a customer and a Rover pet sitter. And this, I think, sends the message more clearly that, hey, you're going to have a positive human experience working with sitters through our platform, much more than the previous simple picture of a user's profile did. after you've kind of explained the problem that you solve for users on a landing page, the second most important priority is to explain how you do that. So here we're kind of helping the user understand how the platform actually works with a simple 3-step diagram, which will help kind of make the offering that we're suggesting, finding loving pet care in your neighborhood, more tangible for them. Here we're beginning to add the testimonial section, and here I really wanted to emphasize the pictures of the owners and their pets, because I feel like a purchase like this is often very emotional, and getting those candid photos of happy owners and their dogs and cats is really going to help sell the message a little bit more. So we're taking their existing testimonials and just blowing up the pictures a little bit more so they're more front and center, and then making sure that the testimonial text itself is nice, sharp, and clear. And again, if you're ever in a situation where you're dealing with user-submitted imagery of sorts and you want it to fit with your site's branding, adding a really light color overlay on top of it generally sells that a little bit more. So here we've got images with their own blend of different saturated colors, but we make it work with the aesthetic by adding a very light color overlay with the brand color, or the brand accent color rather, to kind of just hit home the message that this is a Rover image. Now here, of course, we're adding a secondary call to action that kind of sells a secondary value prop on top of what they're already selling, their primary value prop, which is some sort of remote service work. Now, what we're doing here is really trying to subdue this call to action with light gray filter behind it to send the signal to the user that, hey, this is a new service that's secondary to what you're actually supposed to consume. And I think this is generally considered a pretty good heuristic for solving that problem. Putting these little third-party review widgets next to the primary call to action on a site is a commonly established pattern to give the user a little bit more, kind of a hit of trust right before they are supposed to engage with the call to action. But it's important that when you put these things here, they have to be verifiable. You can't just say, hey, we have 5 stars on Nextdoor without linking the user to Nextdoor. So you'll see that that's what I'm doing here, in addition to making sure that this third-party review block doesn't actually distract that much from the primary usability and getting users to click those call to actions just above it. And this will be the first time that we've designed a footer in real time for people on this channel. And I just want to say that designing a good footer is very challenging. It's a very challenging design problem because you're dealing with, generally speaking, lots of content that looks kind of the same, but it has to be displayed in such a manner that indicates to the user that it's not the same, so they can disambiguate between what's clickable and what's not clickable and what's just a piece of brand flair. So generally speaking, a good heuristic is to have some kind of meaningful disambiguation between the headers of the columns, meaning you want to change 1 to 2 things about the headers versus the links, and then, in my experience, subduing the links very slightly with a 80 to 60% opacity filter really sends the signal, hey, this is a clickable element. If you do those things together, in addition to using a completely different high contrast color for the footer, generally speaking, you get away with what feels to be a more modern footer. And I do this with pretty much all of my sites these days, and feel free to just steal it because it works so well. If you have an email opt-in or some kind of secondary lead capture funnel in the footer, just having the form float between the very last section and the footer itself gives it a more appealing aesthetic and kind of implies to the user, hey, this is a fun interactable element, why don't you interact with me? Which boosts engagement very slightly. So it's a bit of a cheesy tactic, but it works really well for me. And here now you can see I'm basically just going through all of the sections and adding some last minute polish. So instead of showing that to you here, let's just skip to the end and we can review the whole thing at once there. Alright, damn it, I'm forcing myself to stop there. Sometimes, especially when you're doing these big landing page redesigns, you can get really down in the weeds and start designing more and more little elements, and it's just, you're never done until you decide that you're done. So I'm calling it there. And clearly there's still a lot of room for improvement here. There's lots of things I would like to have done if this was a fully fledged, complete landing page overhaul for like this company. But in a nutshell, I think this is a leap forward in terms of their positioning and the ability to attract more customers through their funnel. So here we've got the old UI. Everything's a little bit intimidating, I think. Lots of clashing colors and weird use of spacing throughout the site. Those are kind of the main issues. And then we have the new site here with very modern, clean UI, a different approach to imagery that feels a lot more 2022, although that might be dated next week. We've got really simple typography, really embellishing the people behind the product, the actual sitters themselves and the customers and their dogs and cats. And then, of course, revamped footer with a simple call to action that kind of pulls my attention straight to it. I bet they'd get a lot more signups if they used a call to action like this. So that's it. Let me know what you think. And for those of you that celebrate, I hope you had a wonderful Christmas this weekend. Until the next one, I'm going to go wash my eyes now, and I'll see you next week, guys. Take care.